The war on Gaza has ended. After nearly 466 days of Palestinians being slaughtered en masse, the war is finally over. After over 46,000 of Israeli killings and the displacement of nearly the entire population, a ceasefire has been reached. What toll does this war take on the Palestinians, and what does their future hold? When will people of Gaza return to their normal lives, and what are the potential scenarios for the governance, given that we are days away from the inauguration of Donald Trump, whose plans for Gaza are still unknown? Welcome to In Depth. Welcome back. According to The Guardian, the 15-month conflict in Gaza has left the region devastated, with no clear winner and significant uncertainty about Gaza's future. Israel's reputation has been severely damaged, and there is no consensus on how peace could be achieved. Despite the ceasefire, Gaza's future remains uncertain. The situation is complicated by divisions within Israel's political leadership, especially from figures like Smotrich, who insisted on resuming the war for Israel to stay secure. The future of Gaza depends on whether a viable political solution can emerge, including the potential for a unified Palestinian governance structure.
Israeli occupation forces have intensified strikes on Gaza hours after a ceasefire and detainee release deal was announced, according to residents and authorities in the Palestinian enclave. Mediators, meanwhile, are looking to quell the fighting ahead of the truce's start on Sunday. Israel and Hamas have finally agreed to a ceasefire to hold the 15-month war in Gaza and free the remaining detainees, raising hopes of an end to the devastating war that has shaken the Middle East and the wider world. The deal outlines a 6-week initial ceasefire with a gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip, while detainees held by Hamas are freed in exchange for Palestinian prisoners detained by Israel. However, the agreement requires approval from Israel's Security Cabinet, which was expected to meet on Thursday. The meeting has been delayed, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office accusing Hamas of attempting to obtain last-minute concessions on some aspects of the deal. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden praised the deal, saying the agreement would halt the fighting in Gaza, surge much-needed humanitarian assistance to Palestinian civilians, and reunite the detainees with their families. Biden also indicated that talks will go beyond the temporary ceasefire to a phase 2 that could include a permanent end of the war. A senior U.S. official noted that the agreement was brokered with unprecedented cooperation between Biden and Trump administrations. This is an important detail, as Trump will take office a day after the truce comes into effect.
Well, and for more analysis, we're joined from Cairo by Mr. Khaled Dawood, Managing Editor of Al-Ahram Weekly, and Mr. Meher Safi, political analyst. Thank you both, the gentlemen, for being with us on Qnews. And let me start here with Mr. Dawood. What could be the potential scenarios for Gaza's future now that a ceasefire has been achieved? And would it last, or would it be a temporary halt in violence?
Well, thanks, Mona, for having me. Probably the answer is in your question, whether it's going to be temporary or permanent. It's a very complicated agreement as far as we have seen, even after the official announcement by the Qataris, by the Americans, by the Egyptians, by almost everyone, that an agreement has been reached. The Israeli side, the Israeli government, until the hour we're talking, has not sealed the agreement, or Netanyahu continues to delay the cabinet meeting that's supposed to vote on the agreement. There are various reports that as some Israeli officials leaked to the Israeli media, Hamas is trying to have some last-minute conditions on the identities of the prisoners, Palestinian prisoners, to be released, or whether it is actually, and I believe that's more likely, that Netanyahu is putting more effort to convince Smotrich not to pull out from his government and to keep the government intact, not to depend on opposition parliament members in the Knesset. I mean, I guess that's the reason why we are all still waiting to say that the agreement has been actually finalized when the Israelis make this announcement. Hamas has already announced yesterday that an agreement has been reached. But still, even if we get this Israeli government approval in a few hours or maximum by tomorrow, it remains to be a lengthy process, complicated conditions. The Israeli hostages, Palestinian prisoners, will be released gradually. The issues related to the redeployment of the Israeli forces within Gaza, because in the first stage, 42 days, there isn't going to be full Israeli withdrawal from the
Yes.
occupied Gaza Strip. So it's
We'll get into the deployment and definitely the division among the Israeli government members. Let me go here to Mr. Safi and the Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, as Mr. Khalid here said respectively, has made it clear that his party will remain in government only if Israel resumes the war on Gaza. Now, how do you interpret such a position, and what does it mean for the decision making of the Israeli government there?
I think that Smotrich's statement is tackling the issue of the Israeli cabinet, and I think that his talks isn't logic. He's in the government and he's saying he's opposed the deal and the policy, but the deal is going to be enforced, particularly that the new U.S. President Donald Trump imposed and practiced pressure upon Israel and carries the several hopes of the Middle East and the Gaza, and wants to put an end to the delay of the war in Gaza. So what's happening, what Smotrich is saying is just words in air. He cannot do anything to hinder the enforcement of the deal. As we can see, the several victims are falling down. Netanyahu, as I describe him as the big maneuverer, might overturn the deal, because since the beginning of the war he does not to end the war and to achieve his own goals. When they agreed with the Hamas, for them is a defeat, because he doesn't want to sit with before Hamas and acknowledging the resistance and Hamas. It is trying to release the prisoners militarily by killing several of the hostages, but they cannot release the rest of them. So they resorted to the pressure as well as the family pressured, and the far right wing, the most extremists, exerted the pressure upon the government, and as they killed the prisoners and never paid any considerations of their circumstances throughout the continued bombardment throughout Gaza. What so much states and whoever is important are just words with nothing new since the beginning of the war. They took and promised him is the most extremist and as he wishes, settlement and displacement and controlling in the Gaza Strip So is saying nonsense as long as the deal on the pass, but there are several of obstacles that created by Netanyahu and his cabinet of not sealing the agreement as appropriate manner.
Yes, it comes at the backdrop of the international communities at large wanting such peace. Now, Mr. Dawood, let me get back to you here. And from your point of view, do you think Trump is likely, of course, when he is inaugurated or when he assumes office, do you think he is likely to pick up Blinken's plan for a reformed and UN monitored Palestinian Authority to oversee the governance of a unified Gaza and the West Bank? What kind of plans do you think he would have?
Well, let's not forget that Mr. Trump, when during his first term in office between 2016 and 2020, he's had his own plan for the Middle East, peace for prosperity. Conferences have been already held in a few Arab countries. The Abraham agreements that were signed between Israel, United Arab Emirates, Morocco, and a couple of other Arab countries, Bahrain and others. I mean, these are all the so-called achievements from Trump's point of view. So I don't think necessarily Trump will pick up the ideas that are being presented by Blinken, considering they're already sort of kind of a competition over who takes credit for the ceasefire agreement. But the outgoing Biden administration has already practically been trying and pressing. I can't say always seriously for a peace agreement, for a ceasefire, at least since May. You're talking about almost 9 months, but they failed to do so. But when Trump won the elections, appointed his own peace envoy, Steve Witkoff, and sent him to Israel and to Qatar, the messages, the tough messages were not only delivered to the Palestinian side, but also to the Israeli side, that Netanyahu has to stop procrastination, that he has to stop failing deals in the last minute with new conditions, and that something needs to be signed before Trump gets into office on January 20, which is Monday, and at the same time maybe give a little credit for Biden before he leaves office on Sunday, in case actually 3 Israeli hostages are going to be released on that day. So it's of course, but at the end of the day, the ball now falls into the hands of the Trump administration. He has his own hardline Zionists surrounding him, all members of his cabinet, which is worrying. And some analysts and experts on the Middle East and Israel, they were warned that in return for possible ceasefire in Gaza, maybe Trump administration would allow Israel more free hand to expand settlements in the West Bank or to occupy more West Bank territories. So it's not necessarily a win-win situation in that case, considering Trump's well-known bias to the Israeli side, his recognition of East Jerusalem as Palestine, as Israel's capital, and the same for the recognition of the Golan Heights. So, I mean, on one hand, it's very good, of course, for the Palestinian people, considering their horrific situation and the big number of people who get killed every day, that this war is going to stop even hours after, not hours, even like 1 hour after the agreement was announced. Israel continued bombing people in Gaza, killing at least 80 human beings in a matter of less than 24 hours. So Palestinians are aspiring for some sort of calm. The hopes and expectations are that if the first stage gets into action, the Israeli hostages started being released, Rafah crossing gets opened, humanitarian aid gets in, maybe that will usher some sort of hope that a second stage can be agreed to and to declare a full cessation of hostilities. But knowing the record of Netanyahu and the current members of the Israeli government, you can definitely expect obstacles on the road and claims of violations from the Israeli side. So it's a tough situation, requires effort from all the mediating parties, as well as outsiders who have influence on the Israeli side, to make sure that they actually mean ending the occupation of Gaza and ending the war, and not just the return of hostages.
Just putting into consideration, Mr. Khalid, that Mr. Trump or President Trump has vowed during his campaign to end all wars, particularly that in the Middle East. Now, getting back to you, Mr. Safi, and the Israeli military is set to withdraw to the borders. This is according to the ceasefire agreement. Now, how realistic is that? And do we expect that the Israeli occupation forces will completely leave Gaza anytime soon? And what could really impede their withdrawal?
To leave Gaza in the near soon. The maneuvers of Israel and Netanyahu are present since the first moment of the agreement. The Israeli forces will remain in Gaza Strip in order to achieve the goals talked by Benjamin Netanyahu following the 7th of October 2023 by eradicating the resistance and Hamas. And Hamas wouldn't be the governing Gaza once again. And we've got used to the ringing, the agreement, and the Israeli maneuvers withdrawing from the Gaza Strip. But the withdrawal will take some time, and Israel might attempt to clarify more, to eradicate what has been lifted from Hamas or the armed factions. But up till now, the situation in Gaza Strip isn't comfortable, but Israel is to continue in the killing process. The Israeli army or their leaders talk about the withdrawal from the Philadelphia corridor and keeping small forces in that place for security and protection, and the complete withdrawal from Netzarim and Shara corridor and Shara Rashid and all the areas occupied by the Israel. Israel might stay in the eastern northern borders of depths more than 2 kilometers within the Palestinian territories in the Gaza Strip, which is very serious. That would give a chance for more of annexation of the land, particularly that Beit Hanun and Beit Lahia and the eastern zone of Shigaiya, and from the line from Beit Hanun to Rafah been completely destroyed, and there are a great amount of forces from the Israeli incursion area. The Israeli army will remain in a period that until achieve the objectives that Netanyahu talked about, that never achieve all of them, only the destruction of the infrastructure of more than 80%, 85%, and killing and more than 2,000 of women and injured, more than 2,000, most of them women and children, and destroying the health sector. The situation is catastrophic. We hope that to be enforced the agreement in order to spare the Palestinian unity for the matters related to the dedications and crossings and delivering the humanitarian aid, and to start the reconstruction and removing the rebels, and to do the searching of those who are missing under the rubble.
Very much indeed. We all hope for that. Let me get back to you, Mr. Dawood. And Israel has been facing growing calls for accountability for its crimes in Gaza. Now, do you think that this agreement or this ceasefire agreement can really help Israel re-establish its tarnished image internationally, which has, Israel has always altered its long-standing narrative as a peaceful, democratic nation? And do you think that Israel would take advantage of such a ceasefire to alter such tarnished image?
Well, I'm not very optimistic, to be honest, at this level. We've already seen the U.S. Congress passing a resolution practically threatening sanctions against the judges and the prosecutors who issued the arrest warrants for Mr. Netanyahu and his former defense minister, Yoav Gallant, for committing war crimes within Gaza. And I don't think that after more than 15 months of war machine killing people on a very daily basis, violating all the rules of law and even wars itself, we are going to say that Israel really cares about its image on the outside world. And again, they depend more on the support that they get from the United States and other key European nations. And unfortunately, even up until the last minute, we've seen them attacking hospitals, attacking schools. I mean, again, all with the same claim that suspected Hamas militants are hiding inside. But again, let's hope that this difficult task awaiting the mediators will be successful, particularly in terms of moving from the first stage to the second stage. But already we've heard from Mr. Biden yesterday saying that the parties agreed that the ceasefire will hold as long as negotiations between the two sides for the second stage continue. But again, I mean, knowing the volatile situation on the ground, the composition of the Israeli government, the serious fear by the Palestinians and also by the families of Israeli hostages that Netanyahu and the right-wing hardliners within his government will seek any excuse to resume the war again and go back to the same old failing argument about force is the only way to free the hostages and that they need to wipe out Hamas militarily, totally, and its governance ability, which is, again, another key challenge, Mona, that we're going to face in case the ceasefire holds. Who is going to govern Gaza after the ceasefire takes place? I mean, again, Netanyahu has made it clear he's not going to allow Hamas to be back into the office, but he also said he doesn't want the Palestinian Authority. So that's a lot of work as well to do on who's going to be responsible for Gaza, whether this ceasefire, as President Abdel Fattah Sisi noted yesterday and many others, should be the first step towards a serious peace process for the establishment of a Palestinian state. We don't want to see a war taking place between the two sides once every 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, with a very heavy human toll, because we're not dealing with the core issue, which is the uniting of the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem, make a one Palestinian state with equal rights next to Israel, and that's going to be the lasting solution for this conflict, and not depending on force alone, on thinking that Hamas has been weakened, because practically up until the last few days, Hamas has been successful in directing very painful strikes against the Israeli occupation troops, killing many young Israeli soldiers. So again, it's not only Hamas and the Palestinian people are losing, but the Israeli side is inflicting heavy losses. And from the point of view of many Israelis, this war has lost its purposes. It's been going on for no purpose or reason, because even according to outgoing Foreign Secretary of the United States State Department Secretary Antony Blinken, Hamas will always manage to recruit new members instead of those who die, as long as the Israeli occupation continues, as long as the suffering of the Palestinian people continues. So again, that's a very long road, but it's possible. The plans have always been there, but many dynamics are likely to get into place before we actually see on the ground long-term lasting stability.
You're speaking here about the will of the Palestinians themselves. Let me go here to Mr. Safi. And in your view, how will the continuous Israeli bombardments, particularly that we have seen just in 24 hours since the ceasefire was announced, how will that reflect on the deal?
Upon the announcement of the deal, up till now, more than 100 martyrs and injured in a continued bombardment in the northern of Gaza and the central of Gaza as well. a policy that we've got used to it from Israel. Even in the previous Israel, since the beginning of the war, there were bombardment operations. We've used to it, the Israel not to abide of the ceasefire agreement through killing and taking advantage of the celebrations of Palestinians in stopping the massacres. It is a repeated policy to glorify the victory since the beginning of the war. So it's not that something isn't that new, but I think the agreement will take effect in the January 19. And what happened is only a proof with Israel with the ceasefire in Lebanon as well. It's a habit of Israel by systematically killing the Palestinians, whether in Gaza or in the Palestinian territories.
Briefly,
in
Mr.
general.
Safi. Briefly, Mr. Safi, if you can, briefly, sir, if you can just tell us, will that reflect on the deal, and what are we expecting at this upcoming stage?
I think that the deal will be enforced despite the violations of the deal, and there is an international pressure and Egypt and Qatar in order to enforce the deal before the arrival of President Trump.
Yes,
and the Israeli people, the families of the prisoners are practicing a great pressure upon Israel, and it is a greater chance for the families to the detainees.
Indeed,
to
indeed. Unfortunately, our time is out here, and I have to end that was Mr. Khalid Dawood, managing editor of Al Ahram Weekly, and Mr. Meher Safi, political analyst. We thank you so much for your insights, and I guess that brings us to the end of today's episode of In Depth. Many thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.